Thanks for being in the room. Great to have four smart, connected people to talk about this. And by this, I mean sometimes I say mania of what is happening right now in college sports. I think everyone knows what we're talking about, but we're going to get into it because NIL and the collectives and everything that is now possible in college sports, it's a total sea change. I don't want to waste too much time with everyone's resume and life story, right? But sometimes the intros have already happened. Today they haven't. So let's just real quick. Jeff Granger is the founder of Hampton Collective, the NIL Hampton Collective. It's called
68 Oak.
68 Oak at Hampton in Virginia. Also played ball there. He's the founder of the collective. We'll talk about that. Rachel Baker is the first ever, by the way, GM of a D1 men's basketball program. She's the GM of men's basketball at Duke. Did I say all that right? Yeah, great. Brian Mason is the NIL director, an exciting new position that we'll talk about in sports that we're seeing a lot more of at U Wisconsin. Go Badgers.
On Wisconsin.
That's right. And better that you know the phrase that we say. And Catherine Marquette is collegiate partnerships and sports marketing at Under Armour.
Yes.
We all know Under Armour. Great to have these folks. So let's dive in. And I want to say right now that I will leave time for a couple questions at the end, ideally. So you got questions, cook them up. But I actually want to start with Jeff because in some ways I think Jeff represents the perfect example of what's happening now that NIL is allowed, now that college athletes can make these individual deals, now that boosters can more overtly and explicitly donate and get the players paid. Jeff started the collective at his alma mater where he also played. Talk to us a little bit about that and about the process and how it all works.
Oh, man. I think it's loaded, right? But playing at the university, you always want your university to do better than when you were there. At least that's what it's my goal as an alum. So I was talking to the AD. We had a brand new AD, brand new president. So it was a massive change happening at the university, along with the opportunity for NIL all at the same time. So it's like, let's wrap our arms around all of this. And we talked, and they supported the NIL decision for us to go forward with it. Obviously, we wanted to have a good partnership with the university and not be adversarial. And we talked to the AD and the president, and they supported it. And we started our collective, and we're moving forward at this point. And I think being a former player, it gave me the kind of idea that, man, if I had these things that these young student athletes are given the access to right now, where would I be? Or how further along would I be? And not just monetarily. We're not playing at the same levels of the Duke and the Wisconsins yet. We aspire to be there. But what it does is it gives our student athletes, especially HBCU student athletes, if they're not going to play at the next level, an opportunity to maybe sit with Catherine, right, at Under Armour because they're going to do a sponsorship. We're sponsored by Under Armour at Hampton, right? So we sit our student athletes with her, and maybe it turns into an internship, turns into a job later after school when they stop playing whatever sport it is. So I think that's the whole purpose of NIL that we've launched at Hampton, not so much around the money aspect, but what can we help wrap our arms around you and get you to compete on a high level, but also have some longevity after the sport.
And just as a follow-up, I mean, unlike Brian where it's your full-time job, this is, would you call it a volunteer role? I mean, you've got a separate job, but how much time is this taking?
No, this is no volunteer. This is passion, right? We want to see our boys win, our girls win, and it is a passion for us. If there's a lot of Hampton people in this room, that's why when they said Duke and Wisconsin, I was like, wait, nobody said clapping real loud when Hampton was in here, but I saw some folks. But there we go. There we go. There's some real passion that we have to spring our university forward. We saw enrollment drop because we are a private institution, but as our athletics competes and does well, enrollment goes right back up, right? And we have one of the largest endowments as an HBCU, right? And I think that those are the things that we can hang our hat on, and sports is just another aspect and part of that that'll help push us forward. And I think that's what it's really about, pushing the university forward, not just the student athletes. It's a minor part of a bigger ship that we're all sailing.
Yeah, Rachel, when we talk about the rise of these collectives, how does that affect what you are doing on the GM side? And we were talking a little bit before the panel about how, depending on the school, GM, which itself a relatively new role. We'll talk about NIL director as well. I feel like we've got the rise of these two new-ish roles and their importance. But we talked about how depending on the school, in some cases it's really managing the team and actual recruitment and talent. In other cases, it's really more like a business role.
Yeah, I promise Coach Shire doesn't care at all what I think about X's and O's. So with me and my background, having worked in the brand space on the corporate side and with players for as long as I had, Coach Shire was just looking for someone to complement everything that they were doing on the court. So when you think about everything at Duke, and we talk about it being a lifetime decision, and with a bunch of 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, the idea of networking, showing up the right way. I always say it's really hard to be a student at Duke. It's hard to be a student athlete. And now they're like, hey, do you want to be the CEO of your own business too? So that's the lens of trying to make those things a lot easier for our guys that I really focus on. So as we've seen different GMs or recruiting GMs or NIL directors, they're all kind of focused on different things. And I think it's a lot based on the individual skill set, and then also a lot based on the blind spots or the priorities of the head coach or the athletic director that's assigning those individuals.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the student athlete, and in some ways all of this a little bit calls into question the idea of the student athlete, right? I mean, the idea that every athlete is now their own brand and business and can monetize that. Yes, they're also students, but you look at realignment and all of the travel impact. I mean, you've got Stanford kids going to Boston College to play games now because of this. And of course, then you bring in the NIL focus. Brian, when you guys approach this stuff at Wisconsin, is that sort of a concern or risk that you're also trying to protect for? Is that, okay, everyone can be a business now, you're also still in school, you're also still in class.
Absolutely, and that's something that I think we have to, in folks who are in position like ours, have to help businesses, brands, fans that want to contribute and be part of the NIL ecosystem. We have to help them understand that this is just part of what these student athletes are doing, and whether it's there's always this tie between NIL and influencer marketing, and that's true. Absolutely, there's a direct connection there, but those creators, those influencers that brands are used to working with, they've chosen to make that their career, and they are basing their days around churning out good content and getting all the details right and trying to make themselves more valuable. And when you're working with a student athlete, there's some inherent advantages that come with that. The backing of the logo on their jersey and all of those things that give you this affinity that they bring to the table that maybe a traditional influencer doesn't. But the trade-off of that is this is only part of their experience and part of what they're able to do. And so helping businesses, helping brands understand that's something you have to navigate, that they're not sitting at their computer or their camera waiting to make your content, and that you have to work with them. That's just one of the many microcosms, I think, of what make the jobs of those of us, especially on campus, so interesting. Is everyone's coming at this from a different place. Every situation is different, and it really takes a human touch. There's no do NIL button you can click
right.
that
That
just makes this work for the athlete, for the brand, for anyone. So I think I'm sure it's the same with everyone. Like, the day looks different every day because the situations change every day.
I think if there's an entrepreneur in the room, though, create a do NIL button would be a great idea.
That would be great.
We could use that, yeah.
Now, it's a perfect segue to bring you in, Catherine, and I'm glad you mentioned the creator aspect. We are here on the creativity stage. But how are you guys approaching this at Under Armour, especially, I'm obviously particularly interested in, I don't want to say the risks, but, there's some optics here when we talk about suddenly 17, 18-year-olds signing business deals off the court.
Yeah. I mean, I think brands like the Under Armours, the Nikes, the Adidases, even the Gatorades, those endemic to sport, have been in the space for a while. Like, while we haven't necessarily leveraged the collegiate athlete as the face of, to some extent you'd argue we have. I mean, that's what happens when you think of outfitting and these athletes, particularly those who play on the big stage themselves, whether it's field, court, ice, you name it. So we're a little bit more used to it. I think we're a proud sponsor of both Hampton and Wisconsin, thankfully. That was really good planning, by the way. But yeah, I mean, but I think we work with them really closely on everything from an outfitting perspective, first and foremost. We don't have really a place to play if we don't get the basics right, which is really how do these athletes show up authentically and in a position where they're competing, practicing, et cetera, to the best of their ability. But I think when it comes to then telling stories off the field, we view it as an opportunity. We don't really focus as much on the collective side of things. I don't want to say that we will never one day touch pay to play, but at least to date we have not touched pay to play. That's really to understand it, because we're not going to be good partners with our universities if we don't understand the reality of their economics and how it's changing on a constant basis. But we really engage in it from the opportunity from a marketing standpoint. We have longstanding relationships with these universities on stage and otherwise. How do we now actually have a face to it in a way that we didn't before, a voice to it, an athlete storytelling, whether short form, user generated, long form. I mean, I think that is really remarkable. And we really work very closely with the new positions that are being created to ideally actually protect the athlete from what you just said, of engaging in deals that could be fraudulent or could lead them down a wrong path, which is not what I think anyone here at least wants to enable.
Yeah, you mentioned pay to play, and I'm big on getting all of your expert takes on recent news, and I think a big story was this UNLV quarterback. Everyone in the room see this story? Does this ring a bell? Deciding to redshirt for a year, leave UNLV because this young man claimed I was promised a $100,000 deal that didn't materialize. There were some other kind of hinky elements here. The agent may not have been licensed. It also sounds like it was just a verbal agreement. Maybe you shouldn't choose your school based on a verbal. A lot going on there. But obviously, when something like this is in the news, I think it makes a lot of people snap to attention and say, wait a minute, what is happening here? This is sort of the dark side, if you will, of the Pandora's box that we've opened with NIL. How do you approach stuff like this? How do you prevent this from happening? Will we see more examples like this?
To be clear, if our head of compliance is watching, none of us engage in pay to play. So that's the one rule that still exists, that it's not pay to play. But in terms of how we've set up our relationship with our collective and how our collective engages with our student athletes, kind of to your point, if it's our job to protect them and whether it's fraudulent or not athlete-friendly agreements that may protect a donor's investment but doesn't necessarily protect a student athlete's experience at Duke, that reflects on us. So when you're recruiting, when you're making these promises to these athletes and families, the collective has to be in a lot of ways a reflection of what you're telling them on a day-to-day basis. So it quite literally based on the contract couldn't happen at Duke. And I think it's really important that in order to avoid those kind of things that you continue to be athlete friendly. And I know that it is technically like the dark side of all of this, but it also holds coaches, administrators, universities accountable for recruiting promises that historically they haven't had to really follow up on. So.
Yeah, I think it's changed the landscape completely, right? From recruiting all the way down to the mid-major universities like Hampton, right? Duke is going to be Duke, Wisconsin's going to be Wisconsin, and the ads and TV revenue, all that's going to flow in. It looks different for us, and that's a real reality, right? And I think across the HBCU spectrum, it's pretty much the same. But it also changes our recruiting. We can't play in the portal the same way because we don't have the same pocket, right? And I think that goes back to us now going to recruit 3 or 4-star high school kids where Duke's not looking at high school kids unless they're the number 1 5-star at Wisconsin, the same thing, right? Where we may be looking at a kid that comes to, and I'm just using basketball as an example because I played. It's easy for me that way. But now we're recruiting a high school kid that we come and he develops for freshman, sophomore year, and he transfers after the second year because we can't afford him. So the whole landscape changes, but I think building this whole NIL package, like you said, the parents are involved, the families are involved at a different level now. Not is it just, hey, what does this degree look like? It's what can you do for my kid? And then when for us, our competitive advantage now is our rich history, our heritage, what we have going on, but also who we can connect you with. Yeah. That's the biggest thing we can put in front of you right now because we don't have the same, amount of revenue to spend. And I think that is where, having this collective for us is important. But it's also one of the things that we have to level set and have expectations with our parents up front too, is we can't do what everyone does. These are the things that we can do, and that's that.
I think the expectations piece is a big part of this, honestly, at whatever level you're at. I mean, Rachel talks about contracts, and that is a great way to make sure everyone's on the same page with what the expectations are. Yeah. And so what you see happening that, to your point, probably will not be the last situation, and I don't want to comment on somebody else's business, not involved in it, but at the same time, there's no standardization across universities, across levels. So everyone's sort of approaching this differently. You want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt that they're approaching it, in the right way. But keeping expectations in line and doing that in a way that everybody can look back and say, this is what I was told, this is what happened. It's challenging, but we've got to get to a place where no matter where you're at, whether you're at Hampton or you're at Wisconsin or you're at Duke, your expectation in terms of what your experience might look like and what the follow-through would be is the same. That's something we all need to strive for.
And that's why, in many ways, the NIL director role we're seeing, rise across schools is in some ways a compliance role, right? Or it's,
Yeah.
I mean, it's following, it's setting expectations too.
Absolutely. I think I call myself an amateur compliance officer. I call myself an amateur attorney, amateur marketer, an amateur multimedia rights analyst. All of those things. It's a variety of hats, but we came from a world in college sports, and I've worked in this for almost 20 years now, where we had a very thick manual where everything was in black and white. Mm-hmm. And you could easily go back and, well, you might need an interpretation on something. Well, you get an interpretation and you'd apply the rule. The reality is now we are operating completely outside of that black and white.
West.
And so whether it's how international students can benefit from NIL or not, whether it's what's permissible in an NIL contract with a collective or is not, there's still just a lot of we're figuring it out. And you want to find the person that has the answer, and in a lot of cases there isn't that person because there isn't an answer yet.
Yeah. It makes so I grew up mostly in the professional sports world, so worked for a lot of professional sports properties, and even when I was on brand side before, it was in the professional sports realm. So jumping into the college landscape, this is my first 15 months really on that side of it. The good thing is there's no one with an answer. So if you're going to jump in now, because even people with 20 years are still actually trying to figure it out. And I think those of us who have experience on the other side are coming in and we understand the world of collective bargaining, which is probably the next step for athletes, and the idea of being able to leverage an athlete's face, literally name, image, likeness. This is not new. I mean, it's been happening in the professional realm forever. It's happened with models. It's happened with actors. Like, it's just now opening up a new audience. And so the world of quote unquote NIL is not a new thing. It's just how do we now modernize it and integrate it into, I don't want to say an antiquated program, but a program that literally had manuals that were black and white, and that was what it was.
Let's talk about the brand and sponsor side for a moment. And Rachel, you were at Nike in the past, so in a way, not only the great Under Armour planning here with Under Armour schools, but Nike and Under Armour on the stage. Another piece of recent news was Cooper Flagg, a Duke star, signing an NIL deal with not Nike, the big, Duke big Nike school, but with New Balance. Mm-hmm. And, in the NFL and NBA, we see examples like this all the time where a player has their own individual sponsorship. It's different from the official league-wide or team-wide sponsor. That's when you sometimes see the tape covering the logo, or don't put your Gatorade on the table at the post-game presser because Celsius is the team sponsor. What do you see happening now, and from Under Armour's perspective, but then also from Duke's perspective? I mean, is that an issue? Is that just something we'll navigate and no big deal? You're going to see more, separate sponsor for separate players, different from the official school sponsor.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to take it first.
Sure. So we were really supportive of Cooper and the decision that he made. He had a bunch of different options, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's much of a secret that we won't have Cooper for very long, so we had to make a longer-term decision for him and his family. And the difference between college athletics and on the pro side is, as written, the Duke contract with Nike does own head to toe in practice and play what our guys, our men and women, are wearing in competition. So it does prohibit Cooper from practicing or playing in Nike shoes, which makes it a lot easier. Do I think in the next 10 to 12 months, not with Cooper, but with someone, that'll become a point of conversation. And as universities start to renegotiate those contracts, you could see brands have to pay a premium to ensure you still have head to toe of student athletes. And then as you enter into contracts at one point between the university and a student athlete, is there a way to navigate some carve outs to be able to have some exclusive rights? And I think, again, all of this is soon to come, but at least we get to figure it out together, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, New Balance did it with Cameron Brink as well, right? I mean, she was entering what would be her last year in collegiate, and they did a great job of signing her, knowing that her next step was the WNBA. So it's an interesting space to Rachel's point, we're head to toe, hand and foot in college, which is an advantage to the brand. Should that deviate, it actually materially changes the value proposition on the brand side. And so I think that's something that all parties, and this is where relationships are really important, and laying out on the table what's really important in the economics of XYZ and what does return on investment mean from both sides is going to be really important to have with our partners moving forward. But should and if and when, whichever preposition you want to use there, should that actually end up happening, it does change the value equation. And so I think that's just something that universities will have to weigh on their side because they have numerous factors and inputs that come into making a decision as to with whom to partner, and vice versa on the brand side coming into those equations. It's everything from the strength of conference to the strength of TV viewership to now the ability to actually tell a head to toe story.
Change is the norm and more change is coming. That's what I'm hearing. Boy, we could have done an hour on this topic. There's so much more. But do we have just one or two questions from the audience? I want to make sure I allow that if you want to stand and belt it out. Please.
With the NIL deals, you guys talked about the high school students going to college. One of the experience that I constantly have had with parents, they always ask these questions. So you guys on the collegiate level, what are some of
Yep, parents.
Hi, parents question, parents and NIL deals. What are the top 3 things you feel that parents need to be aware of when their kids are transitioning from high school to college and they're a student athlete?
Great question.
Could do an hour on just this topic.
Right.
That is, working with parents and families is a big part of what I do on a daily basis. And the biggest piece of it is education. I think patience is another big thing, which is easy to say from the seats that we're in and a lot more difficult if you're coming from a place where you haven't had opportunities like this before and wanting to quickly capitalize on that. So I think it's education, trusting the right people, making long-term decisions, and then the education, of course, being from a financial perspective, from a compliance perspective. But I think it is taking, the one point I would make about college athletics in general, I think that there's this idea that if you walk into practice, it all of a sudden feels like this, Cooper's over here in his New Balance and his agent's talking between Shire. Like, primarily it all is very similar. And to your point earlier, they can now just do what historically regular individuals were able to do, which is to monetize their name, image, and likeness. And I think the more structure that we have, and the more kind of rules and standardizing it across universities will make all of this a lot easier. But that's where I go back to, in the recruiting process, the same thing. Patience, long-term decisions, and education, and trusting the right people.
And I would just echo I think the one key point is, at the end of the day, surround yourself with the right people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have the right people in your ear, people who are experts in these topics that you need to cover, whether it's legal or taxes, all of those types of things. Because unless that is your business as a parent, you're not going to be an expert on those things.
Yeah.
And I think it's very easy for families of prospective student athletes to be taken advantage of if they are not surrounding themselves with the right voices.
Yeah, I think the number one thing I tell my guys is to make sure you have someone that can help you understand contracts, right? We have a lawyer that'll help you, but they don't read it. They go, just like a HIPAA form, I don't think any of us have read it. We go right to the bottom and
Check the
sign
box.
it, right? And our guys do the same thing. How much money am I getting? What do I need to do? And that's all they see. And the fine print is where they lose. And I tell each one of them to read those contracts and make sure you can tell me what's on page 3.
Yeah.
Because no one goes past page 1.
Yeah. Not a parent, so take it for what that is worth. But I think at the end of the day, it's still a stat that only like 2 to 3% of NCAA athletes will become professional athletes. So I think, being a proud aunt of 7, I would at least just be like, make sure that education is still there. It's the very rare exception of an athlete who's going to go in and be like a Cooper, where you know that they're going to go off almost immediately without doubt. So education is still really important. They are almost still that athlete student, even though they've always been called student athlete. And so I just think that's something to always put front and center, is that this path. And there, in other sports, there are now paths where you don't have to necessarily go through college, particularly in basketball. If education is not forefront, pursue maybe another avenue. But otherwise, education is so important and will never steer you in the wrong direction, even if you are one of those few who are fortunate enough to be a professional athlete one day.
Yeah.
Great question, and done. Great conversation. Really appreciate it. And we are covering all this stuff very closely at Front Office Sports. So I hope you guys read FOS for more. We'll probably get all these folks back on our airwaves soon, I hope. And can we give them a round of applause?